Welcome back to the universe of God, where we are continuing to discover the biblical text and what it says about two messiahs. And so I want to welcome you back to part 4 of A Tale of Two Messiahs, and we're going to pick up where we left off. In part 3, we left off discussing Luke chapter 2, and we were focusing on, Jesus, the Good Shepherd. And so one of the things I want to start off saying is, Jesus' story reflects Joseph's story. So we have a parallel here with Jesus and Joseph. And these two are connected in the scriptures. They both started off as beloved sons, favored even. But they still had to become subject to suffering and servitude, and being humbled as well. So even though greatness was tied up inside of them and they were going to be some savior of the world, they still had to be humbled and suffer and serve the people. And so in Joseph's story, he has a dream, and his brothers are, I think it's the stars are basically bowing to him. And I'm so sorry, I can't remember his dream in terms of what it was that was bowing to him. I think it was stars. But anyways, Joseph was one of the favored sons out of 12. He was number 11, but he was the firstborn of his mother and father. So his father, Jacob, had sons by other women. Hey, this is nothing new, having kids with other people, but it always created some hardship and some discord in the families nonetheless. But Jacob, he loved Rachel, and, with that being said, his kids with Rachel were Joseph and Benjamin, and Joseph was the firstborn of those two, but he was favored out of all Jacob's sons. And Jacob even gave Joseph a coat of many colors, and then Joseph has a dream, and basically his family is serving or bowing down to him, and it made his brothers very jealous even more. He's already favored, maybe a little young and maybe a little spoiled, hey, I'm the favorite. It's no secret, and he's the youngest at this time. But eventually his brothers conspire to try to get rid of him, and they throw him into a pit, and then they want to kill him, and so his older brother is, he doesn't want to hurt his father like that. He doesn't really want to kill him. So he sells him into slavery. So Joseph, who was favored, and, was very, very blessed, and had a dream that his family would be bowing to him one day. He knew he was going to be in a position of power at some point. There was a king inside of Joseph, but Joseph is humbled, and he's sold into slavery, and he's put in prison. Okay. He suffers in prison. I think it's for 3 years he suffered in prison, but, basically, he goes through it, and he eventually becomes second ruler to, Pharaoh, and basically he becomes, second in authority, throughout the world, because Egypt was the leader in the world. And through Egypt, the world ends up being saved. But really through Joseph, who's, the prince of Egypt, the world ends up being saved. So here we have Joseph, who ends up becoming prince, and there's, a famine is coming, and he saves the world through his wisdom that God has given him through how to help them. And eventually his family comes to him, not knowing who he is, and he saves them. He has mercy on them. The interesting thing about these stories, Joseph and Jesus, is, again, they had to suffer. And there's something about relating to others and the suffering, and having that in common with other people that qualifies you to be a great leader and king. Both these beloved sons suffered so much to become princes, to become kings. And the story of David also edifies this concept for the making of a truly great king. Because David, he's proven to not just suffer as others do, but he also serves, even to the lowest position. And this is eventually going to teach powerful lessons in leadership and caregiving principles needed to understand, the ins and outs of it all, and to navigate leadership and kingship with deep wisdom and infinite knowledge, so to speak. So David, we're going to bounce over to David, and I'm just going to touch on David really quickly. However, we're going to talk more about David and how he reflects, the Messiah who comes back as the king. David, starts off as a young boy, a shepherder, but he's mighty. He defeats Goliath. He defeats a bear and a lion. But when Samuel in the Bible is looking for the next king of Israel, he ends up in Jesse's house, who has many sons. And he goes through all the sons, waiting for the Holy Spirit to minister to him about who is the next chosen king. And none of these sons are the one. So he just asks, is there another son? And sure enough, there is, and it's David, and he's the shepherder. He's, he is not even in the lineup for king. He is not, looked upon with much favor in this way. However, he ends up becoming the king of Israel. So his story also reflects, Messiah ben David, or Jesus, who comes back as the ruling king. But we're going to go on into Joseph's story, because there's some things about Joseph's story that we need to understand. And one of them is, not just what he went through that mimics what Christ went through, suffering as a servant, being humbled, being judged as evil when he was really good, things like that. But it's about Ephraim. There's something important about Ephraim, because what we notice is we start off with the 12 sons of Jacob, and Jacob is renamed Israel in the Bible, but we start off with the 12 sons of Jacob. But then when we move on to the 12 tribes of Israel, something changes, and that is something important to highlight. So the question I want to ask is, who is Ephraim? Okay, these are some important things to know, that we need to know about Ephraim, especially if we want to understand its connection to Christ as Messiah ben Joseph. So Ephraim is one of the 12 tribes of Israel. The tribe name comes through the lineage of Joseph, because Ephraim is the son of Joseph, who is, of course, also the grandson or son of Jacob. Again, Jacob was renamed Israel. So we're starting off with the 12 sons of Jacob. When Jacob is renamed Israel, we go further ahead into the Old Testament, just a little further, and they're now the 12 tribes of Israel. So if we go back even further, then we will learn that Joshua, the son of Nun, pronounced Yahashua in Hebrew, was an Ephraimite who led the Israelites into the Promised Land after the death of Moses. The Promised Land is the territory belonging to the 12 tribes of Israel. The tribe of Ephraim was a part of the 10 lost tribes of Israel who occupied the northern kingdom, or the northern portion. So the 12 sons of Jacob are Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, and Joseph, and Benjamin. So we're going to focus here the 2 sons of Jacob and Rachel. Remember, Rachel is the one that Jacob loved dearly. And something interesting to note is that Jacob was supposed to work 7 years to earn Rachel's hand in marriage, but Jacob, who was called the supplanter and trickster, was tricked by Rachel's father into marrying her sister first, and Jacob ended up having to work double the time to get Rachel's hand in marriage. So he had to work 14 years instead of 7. So his children with Rachel were favored. They were, there was something special about these children because they came from the one he truly loved and worked double for, okay? So these things are important as they tie to the number two, the two messianic figures, or the two witnesses, the double portion. Anyhow, so then we get to Joseph. He has two sons named Manasseh and Ephraim. So Ephraim, the tribe of Ephraim is coming through Joseph. So let's talk about Levi, who was a son of Jacob. But Levi had no, Levi was the priesthood, and they had no territorial allotment except for the 48 cities. And these 48 cities were located within the territories of the other tribes. In tracking the 12 tribes of Israel, and how the division of tribes was set up according to the land apportionment, the 12 tribes ends up excluding 2 of the direct sons of Jacob. We will discover how this came to be. You see, when it came time to assign in the 12 tribes land in the promised land, again, the Levites, or Levi, the house of priests, had no territorial allotment except for the 48 cities, which were the suburbs, of the other tribes. Something interesting that I do want to share is that the 48 cities reflect the 48 constellations. 6 of these cities were considered cities of refuge for those who were accidentally murdered or were even accused of murder. They could flee to these 6 cities of refuge to avoid punishment. This was done to protect themselves from the penalty of death for killing someone, accidentally, or being accused of it, until they could receive a fair trial. This is in Numbers 35. But why I wanted to mention that is because the 48 cities of the Levitical priest reflect the 48 constellations. The Bible is written in the stars, in the heavens. And that's something I will teach about in another video, another series. But Christ is now our city of refuge. He's the high Levitical priest after the order of Melchizedek. So he frees us from punishment of death for our sin. So here we see Christ associated with the Levitical priesthood. He's the last and final priest, and associated with these cities of refuge. Anyhow, after Levi is removed from the 12, in this way, we are down to 11 sons or tribes, which include Joseph. What's amazing here is that it is never called the tribe of Joseph. Right? First, because Joseph was considered dead by his father. And second, Joseph is sent into Egypt, into the world, and eventually rules that territory. Okay? We see that in his absence, the tribes are now named after his 2 sons, which take the place of Levi and Joseph. So it's not that Joseph is necessarily excluded, but what happens is Joseph ends up receiving a double portion, double for his trouble. The amazing thing is also that the Messiah is considered the new and final high priest, again, as it's mentioned in the New Testament, but he's also a son of Joseph, as mentioned before. Okay, the point is that the 2 sons missing from the tribes are replaced by Joseph's 2 sons, which further represent the 2 messianic figures, being Messiah, ben Joseph, the suffering servant, and was the new and final high priest fulfilling the Levitical priesthood, and both tribes were named after Joseph, or, through his lineage. So Joseph is given a double portion of blessing, double for his trouble, where his sons are given 2 tribes, 2 places in the 12 tribes, when we get from 12 sons to 12 tribes. We see this is a complete and utter fulfillment of scriptures that continue to play out time and time again throughout the history of God's people and throughout time. So Joseph gets a double portion. We're going to come back in video 5 as we continue on with the tale of two messiahs, and I'm going to continue to share more information, something that you might consider esoteric, as we go further into the tale of two messiahs.